Our presentation is based on the factors that negatively affect the population of the Florida manatees. We will first give an overview of the lifestyle of the manatee. Then we will discuss human impacts that negatively affect their population size. Next, we will talk about the various environmental impacts that they face. After that, we will outline the conservation efforts and research currently in place.
Manatees are very large and bulky aquatic marine mammals that can grow up to 12 feet in length and weigh over 3,500 pounds. They can live to be up to 50 to 60 years old and have a totally herbivorous diet, eating over 100 pounds of seagrass per day.
More manatees are killed and die than are born each year. They can only have one offspring at a time. Their gestation periods are very slow, about 12 to 14 months. Manatees have no true predators other than humans. There are many human environmental factors that negatively affect the population.
Some human impacts on Florida manatees. Powerboat collisions have now become the greatest threat to manatees, with 30% mortality rates. Because they are slow and near the surface swimmers, it's very easy for boats, speeding or not, to run over their backs. While death can occur, the usual result is a very scarred and torn up back for the manatee. The boat propellers cut into their backs and leave scars. In Florida, there are many restricted areas and speed limits for boats to decrease the risk of running over manatees, but people often ignore them and are not careful. Manatees were largely hunted and killed for food in the past. Today, in the Caribbean and South America, they are still killed by humans to consume in underdeveloped areas. Some natural occurrences for manatees. Although manatees are able to live a long life, their gestation periods and number of offspring can be a serious issue. As we will see coming up, if a newborn manatee dies shortly before or after birth, it can be devastating towards the population as a whole. Because gestation periods for manatees are anywhere from 12 to 16 months, they can only have one calf at a time. It's a very slow process. So losing one's calf can mean that a new addition won't be added to the population anywhere from 1.5 to 3.5 years. Manatees don't necessarily mate every season either, so we need as many babies to survive as possible.
Environmental impacts on Florida manatees. The ongoing residential and commercial development along rivers in Florida has caused habitat destruction and damaged the seagrass communities on which manatees depend. There have been manatee deaths recently that are believed to be from consuming algae instead of seagrass, which have disrupted their immune systems. A manatee's immune system is already very sensitive, so this has a greatly negative impact. Chemical pollution is also a huge factor in contributing to the decline of manatee populations in Florida. As I talked about earlier, the immune systems of manatees are sensitive to even small changes in food or water composition. The water quality decrease causes them to become more vulnerable to infections and death. Red tides are specific types of harmful algae blooms caused by dinoflagellates. The red tides produce airborne toxins that can cause major respiratory problems, especially for dolphins and manatees. Red tides can also make shellfish poisonous to humans who consume it. The asexual reproduction of these dinoflagellates causes them to multiply rapidly. In 1996, there was an especially large red tide bloom in Florida, causing a total of 585 manatees, or 11% of their population, to die.
This graph shows the overall manatee population fluctuation from 1985 up to 2005. This graph only represents manatees in the state of Florida. As you can see, there is a major spike in 1996 when the worst outbreak of red tides occurred. This is a very good representation of the ups and downs the manatee population faces from year to year. Generally, the declines per year in the population are between 200 and 300 manatees.
In the same time span as the last graph, between 1985 and 2005, we were able to interpret every kind of death a manatee can potentially face. One of the most alarming parts of the graph is 26% of manatee deaths during this time that are still considered undetermined. The second biggest cause of deaths is watercraft or boats with 25%. This followed by 22% perinatal or death either a few weeks before or after birth, 15% natural causes, and 7% cold and environmental stress, and 5% other human impacts. Seeing this breakdown is good because we can now identify the biggest death factors and begin to work on them the most.
Florida manatees currently have several forms of conservation efforts. One of the biggest is tourism. Florida's state marine mammal is the manatee, so that does automatically draw a lot of attention from tourists wanting to see and touch them. The positive side of the tourism. It provides a financial incentive to preserve the species, and after seeing them, tourists are often inspired to help and want to donate to keep them protected. However, there is a big negative side as well. Oftentimes, boats that take passengers out to see manatees are actually increasing the threat. The amount of collisions with manatees drastically increases due to this. Although boats are oftentimes going at a slower speed, it is still very likely that they can be run over with the propellers. Also, as you can see in this photo, there are a lot of scuba diving tourists that go out to see the manatees and its habitat. If they are inexperienced divers, as they usually are, there is a higher risk of their habitat getting damaged.
Florida has been doing a good job of getting the state legislature to agree to certain manatee protection laws. There are speed limits for boats in some major manatee waterways. The downside is that these areas are not under constant watch, so there is still risk. This is a current map of Florida. The blue areas represent manatee protection zones that are protected for a part of the year, most likely summer, when there are many tourists visiting and boats around. The green sections represent areas that are protected year-round. The current goal of manatee conservation groups and the Florida Wildlife Group are to make all the areas currently blue, partially protected, or green, protected year-round. This may take a lot of time and effort, but it will remain the main goal of manatee conservationists for as long as it takes.
Floridians and others across the country who love manatees are eager to help them. Citizen involvement levels are high in Florida. The Save the Manatee Club is one of the biggest manatee nonprofits in the state and was co-founded by Jimmy Buffett. The club not only tracks manatee deaths, but also helps to track and keep manatee populations in check. There is an annual manatee festival held in Crystal River, one of the main manatee sanctuary areas, that raises overall awareness and highlights the importance of manatees in the ecosystem as necessary grazers of vegetation. The Manatee Club even has an adoption program, and you can give a manatee as a gift to someone for a holiday and monitor your special manatee online through video.
Manatees are usually fairly easy to follow and monitor since they are so slow-moving. The easiest way that conservation groups are able to track manatees and tell them apart is by the scars on their backs from various boat propellers. The U.S. Geological Survey's Serenia project compiles all the scar data on manatees statewide. The tracking method seen here is called satellite tracking. The tracking transmitter is encased in a floating tube, as you can see here, and the assembly does not harm the manatee or affect its movement. Radio signals sent from the transmitter are received by satellites and analyzed to give out accurate data on the location of the manatee. Sensors are built into the devices to give additional data on water temperature and the manatee's activities daily. Some of the more interesting data found is that one manatee made a 200-mile trip across the Florida coast in less than 10 days. Another manatee traveled all the way to Florida to Rhode Island in less than 22 days. These long-distance movements have not previously been documented for manatees before these specific satellite trackers.
There are many current manatee research projects that are ongoing, including aerial surveys and photo identification surveys to count manatees and monitor populations, genetic sampling since 2006, in which a small skin tool takes a sample from the manatee and tests for its sex, paternity, and other factors that are key to our understanding of them. One of the big current projects is the reintroduction of manatees in Guadeloupe in the South Caribbean. They were hunted and the population was destroyed 100 years ago. Now 2 captive-born manatees have been released and are being monitored to see if they can learn to forage and survive without human interference. If successful, this will be the first time a sirenian species has been reintroduced in a formerly occupied area. They are also closely monitoring cold stress on manatees and how it can negatively affect their immune systems for long periods of time. The picture in the top left is of an aerial survey. Scientists can see over half of the overall manatee population in one day alone.
To recap, populations of Florida manatees are increasing. The population has rebounded by 500% since 1991, but there is a major misconception that populations are completely back to normal. There is still a very long way to go. The current population is now over 6,300. Most recently, manatees were taken off the endangered list and placed on the threatened list. Many people believe that this is a good thing, and that means that manatees are no longer in danger anymore, and the population is replenished, which is false. Although dangers to manatees have decreased, they are not completely gone. Now that they have been removed from the endangered list, many people in Florida are looking to have the manatee boat zone speed limits and restrictions lifted. This would start the manatee decline process all over again when we have just begun to have stable populations and regulations for them in the state of Florida.
Being careful as a citizen of Florida or as a tourist can significantly decrease the human impacts on manatees. Although we can't completely control the weather, closely monitoring the populations can help us to act sooner rather than later. We know so much more about them than we did even 10 years ago, and as long as continuous research is done, hopefully the manatee will continue living and thriving for years to come. Thank you!